The exhibition title, Ancient and Modern, comes from a book actually, called Bauhaus Weaving Theory, and it refers to the ancient craft of weaving, but it also applies to ceramics, and using that in a modern or new language. I was interested in the way that the Bauhaus, one of its ethoses was to combine art and craft and to not distinguish kind of in status between the two. I also felt an affinity to the female art students who wanted to become artists and then ended up sidelined a bit just by the society and the times that they lived in. So they ended up in craft practices which were considered women's work, but within those confines they still managed to make significant contributions towards textiles as an art form and ceramics in modernising these ancient crafts. The beginnings of the show were at Westdean, where I went on residency for 3 weeks. The facilities were amazing. The kilns, I had access to a really large kiln, so I could make work that fit the kiln, so I could just scale up. And also Ali, the teacher, was really great, and she helped me a lot. So the works I made at Westdean were a large seated figure of a woman, and it's based on a pre-Columbian miniature figure. And then I also made an accompanying tripod vessel in the same glaze. I'm now almost solely focused on representations of the female figure, whereas before I was looking at representations of males in art history and concentrated on the boot and the beard as these signifiers or kind of props that males used to project power and status. So even though this exhibition primarily features women and images of women, there are still a few remnants of the booted man. And I didn't connect it at the time, but it could be a reference to the fascism and the rise of the Nazis, which put an end to the Bauhaus school. And Annie Albers herself, her and her husband had to flee Germany for USA because of the danger to their lives. And there was another weaving student called Otti Berger who was Jewish and died in the Holocaust. So I think the boot is still significant in this exhibition, just as this kind of dark force. So in the show, there is textiles using two forms of construction, knitting and weaving. And I really wanted to learn to weave for this show, kind of just in solidarity with the Bauhaus girls. I divided the textile works into kind of image-based and geometric, and the reason for that was because knitting, there's a technique within knitting called intarsia, which is also called picture knitting, so it just lends itself better to more fluid colour changes. Whereas with weaving, I learnt that you're really restricted by the warp and the weft of the grid, and it ideally, when weaving on a loom, it ideally suits very strict geometry. I'm interested in ancient imagery and early representations of the figure, so mostly the female form. So I've been looking at prehistoric vessels. I found the figure of Nut online while I was researching Egyptian goddesses, and I really liked the figure of her in this kind of bridge shape. It related to the location of the Delaware Pavilion, but also the idea of a woman as a house kind of sheltering or protecting the earth and the sky.